On a freezing winter morning, Ethan Matthews, a teenager already weighed down by the struggles of his single mother and their looming financial hardships, makes a decision that changes everything. Spotting an old man shivering in the cold, Ethan gives away his only jacket, a selfless act of kindness, despite having so little himself. What seems like a small, fleeting gesture soon ripples into an extraordinary journey that Ethan never expected. As the days unfold, Ethan discovers that his simple action has sparked a wave of change, beginning with a stranger's unexpected gratitude. This leads him to the doors of a struggling community center, where he finds himself at the heart of an effort to rebuild hope in a neighborhood forgotten by many. But the path is far from easy. Balancing school, part-time work, and his growing role in the community, Ethan faces mounting pressure, skepticism from peers, and moments of doubt about whether his efforts truly matter. Yet, with each challenge comes an opportunity for growth. Alongside new friends, a surprising mentor, and a community inspired by his compassion, Ethan begins to see the power of kindness to transform not only others, but also himself. As his actions gain recognition and the stakes grow higher, Ethan must confront the question: can one person truly make a difference in a world filled with struggles? Ethan Matthews hunched his shoulders against the biting wind as he trudged home from school. The January air cut through his thin hoodie, sending icy tendrils down his back. His breath formed faint clouds in front of his face, fading into the gray Detroit evening. The streets were quiet, lined with rows of small houses and aging apartment buildings, most of their windows glowing with warmth that felt distant and unattainable to him. Ethan lived in a cramped one-bedroom apartment with his mom, Karen. She worked long hours at a diner downtown, barely making enough to cover their rent and keep the lights on. Their building was old. The radiator often clanked and hissed without giving much heat. The peeling wallpaper and sagging furniture told the story of years spent making do with what they had. For as long as Ethan could remember, life had been a series of tight budgets, second-hand clothes, and tough decisions. He adjusted the straps on his fraying backpack and walked faster, hoping to beat the full brunt of the evening chill. His mom would be home soon, and he wanted to help her with dinner before tackling his homework. As he rounded the corner onto their street, he noticed a figure slumped against the wall of the local convenience store. The man was old, with weathered face and clothes that looked thinner than Ethan's. He sat with his knees drawn up, his arms wrapped around himself as if he could squeeze out enough warmth to survive the cold. A battered cardboard sign lay beside him, the words "Anything helps" barely visible in the dim light. Ethan paused, his heart squeezing painfully. He had seen homeless people before, especially on his way to and from school, but something about this man made him stop. The way he shivered uncontrollably reminded Ethan of the nights when their heat had gone out, and he and his mom had huddled under layers of blankets. He knew that kind of cold. He reached into his pocket, feeling the worn fabric brush against his fingers. All he had was some loose change, $1, and a few coins from buying lunch earlier. It wasn't much, but maybe it would help. Ethan approached hesitantly, crouching down to meet the man's weary gaze. "Here," Ethan said, holding out the coins. His voice wavered, barely audible over the wind. The man looked at the money, then at Ethan, and shook his head slowly. "Keep it, son. You need it more than me." Ethan hesitated, taken aback. "But it's freezing out here. You need something." The man smiled faintly, though it looked more like a grimace. "Kind of you to offer, but it won't do much for this cold." Ethan glanced at his own hoodie. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He hesitated, the wind biting at his exposed skin as he unzipped it. His mom's voice echoed in his head, warning him to dress warmly, but he ignored it. He draped the hoodie over the man's thin shoulders. "Take this," Ethan said firmly. "I'll be okay." The man's eyes widened, tears welling up as his trembling hands clutched the hoodie. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You don't know what this means." Ethan swallowed hard, standing up quickly to hide the lump forming in his throat. "Take care," he muttered, turning to walk home. The apartment was dim when Ethan arrived. He flipped the light switch in the kitchen, revealing their small, worn-out table and mismatched chairs. The fridge hummed quietly, its contents sparse as usual. He set his backpack on the floor and rubbed his hands together, trying to coax some feeling back into his fingers. Karen came home a short while later, her face pale with exhaustion. She set her purse on the counter and ran a hand through her hair, which was still pinned back from her shift. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, her voice tired but warm. "How was school?" Ethan shrugged, pulling out a chair at the table, same as always. Karen raised an eyebrow as she set a grocery bag down and started unloading it. "Where's your hoodie? You were wearing it this morning." He hesitated, then mumbled, "I gave it to someone." Her hands froze over a can of soup, and she turned to look at him. "What do you mean, you gave it to someone?" "There was this man outside the store," Ethan explained. "He looked so cold, Mom. I couldn't just walk past him." Karen stared at him, her expression a mixture of worry and pride. Finally, she sighed and set the can on the counter. "You've got a big heart, Ethan. I just wish we had more to give." Ethan smiled faintly. "It's okay. He needed it more than me." Karen shook her head, pulling a blanket from the couch and wrapping it around his shoulders. "Well, you're not going to freeze on my watch. Sit down. I'll make us some soup." As the smell of warm tomato soup filled the apartment, Ethan felt a flicker of warmth spread through his chest. Despite their struggles, he and his mom always found a way to make things work. And tonight, he would go to bed knowing he had done something good. That night, as Ethan lay under his thin covers, shivering slightly despite the extra blanket, he thought about the man he had helped. He wondered where he was now, whether he had found a warmer place to sleep. The thought lingered in his mind as he drifted into a restless sleep. He woke up the next morning with a scratchy throat and a heavy feeling in his chest. The cold had settled into his bones, and it took all his willpower to drag himself out of bed. Karen was already in the kitchen, frying an egg for him. "You sound awful," she said, handing him a steaming cup of tea. "You should stay home." Ethan shook his head, sipping the tea slowly. "I can't, Mom. I've got a test in math today." Karen sighed but didn't argue. "At least wear something warm." She rummaged in the closet and pulled out an old hoodie of hers. It was too small for her, but fit Ethan well enough. "Thanks, Mom," he said, pulling it on. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As he walked to school, the wind felt even harsher than the day before, cutting through the thin fabric of the borrowed hoodie. Ethan hunched his shoulders and quickened his pace, keeping his head down. He passed by the spot where he had seen the old man, but the corner was empty now. He hoped the man was okay. Ethan arrived at school feeling drained. His classmates hardly noticed him as he made his way to his locker. That was fine by him. He preferred to blend into the background anyway. But as he turned to head to class, his teacher, Ms. Green, stopped him in the hall. "Ethan, are you feeling all right?" she asked, concern in her eyes. "I'm fine," he said quickly, not wanting to draw attention to himself. Ms. Green studied him for a moment, then nodded. "If you need anything, let me know." Her words stayed with him throughout the day, a small but unexpected kindness that made the bitter cold a little easier to bear. Ethan didn't know it yet, but that small kindness would be the first of many ripples to come. Ethan's cold worsened as the week dragged on. The borrowed hoodie did little to shield him from the relentless winter wind. By Thursday, his throat felt raw, and his nose wouldn't stop running. Still, he trudged to school each day, determined not to fall behind. His classmates barely noticed his quiet struggles. Ethan preferred it that way. He didn't need anyone's pity. At least, that's what he told himself. But deep down, the isolation stung, especially when he overheard conversations about warm coats, weekend plans, and the kind of comfort that seemed so far removed from his life. Friday came, and Ethan was exhausted by the time the final bell rang. His feet dragged as he left the building, each step heavier than the last. The cold air stung his cheeks as he started the long walk home. Halfway down Main Street, he felt a hand tap his shoulder. He turned to see Ms. Green, his math teacher, bundled in a heavy wool coat and a bright red scarf. "Ethan, wait up," she called, her breath visible in the freezing air. He stopped, surprised. "Hi, Ms. Green. What's up?" She frowned, studying his pale face and the thin hoodie that barely covered his shivering frame. "You don't look well. Are you sure you should be walking home in this weather?" Ethan shrugged, avoiding her gaze. "It's fine. I'll be okay." Miss Green hesitated, then sighed. "Ethan, you're a hard-working student. You always do your best, and I admire that. But sometimes you need to let others help you." She slipped off her scarf and handed it to him. Ethan stared at it, stunned. "I can't take that. It's yours." "It's warm, and you need it more than I do," she said firmly. "Take it, Ethan." Reluctantly, he accepted the scarf and wrapped it around his neck. The soft fabric instantly warmed his skin, and he couldn't help but smile, though it was faint. "Thank you," he murmured. Mrs. Green smiled back, her eyes kind. "Take care of yourself, Ethan. And if you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." She waved and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, the scarf a bright splash of color against his drab hoodie. When Ethan got home, Karen was sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of bills in front of her. Her shoulders were slumped, her face drawn with worry. "Hey, Mom," Ethan said softly, hanging the scarf on the back of a chair. Karen looked up, her smile tired but genuine. "Hi, sweetheart. How was school?" "It was okay," he said, setting his backpack down. "Ms. Green gave me her scarf. She said I needed it more than she did." Karen's eyes softened, and she reached out to touch the scarf. "That was kind of her." Ethan nodded, then glanced at the bills. "Is everything all right?" Karen hesitated, then sighed. "Just the usual. Rent's due next week, and I'm still short. I'll figure it out." Ethan's stomach tightened. He hated seeing his mom like this, constantly worrying about money. "I'll try to pick up an extra shift at Mr. Patel's store," he offered. Karen shook her head. "You need to focus on school, Ethan. You're already doing so much." Ethan wanted to argue but decided against it. He didn't want to add to her stress. Instead, he went to his room and pulled out his math homework, determined to distract himself. The next morning, Ethan bundled up in the scarf and hoodie before heading to Mr. Patel's convenience store. The store was small but warm, its shelves stocked with canned goods, snacks, and other essentials. "Ethan," Mr. Patel greeted him warmly from behind the counter. "Good to see you. How are things?" "They're okay," Ethan said, managing a small smile. "Do you need help today?" Mr. Patel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Yes, I could use some help stocking the shelves. But first, let me make you some tea. You look like you could use it." Ethan hesitated, but the smell of brewing tea was too inviting to refuse. He followed Mr. Patel to the back of the store, where the older man poured steaming chai into a paper cup and handed it to him. "Here," Mr. Patel said. "This will warm you up." Ethan took a cautious sip, the sweet spiced tea spreading warmth through his chest. "Thank you," he said, his voice soft. "You're a good kid, Ethan," Mr. Patel said, watching him. "Always willing to help. That's a rare thing these days." Ethan shrugged, feeling a little embarrassed. "It's nothing, really." "It's not nothing," Mr. Patel insisted. "Kindness is never small." By the time Ethan finished his shift, the sun was beginning to set. Mr. Patel handed him a small envelope with his pay and added a loaf of bread and a carton of eggs. "For your family," he said with a wink. Ethan's throat tightened, and he nodded. "Thanks, Mr. Patel." "Anytime, Ethan. You take care." That evening, Ethan and Karen made French toast with the bread and eggs. The simple meal felt like a feast, and for a while, they forgot about rent, bills, and the cold. You know, Karen said as they cleaned up, I think people are noticing how hard you work, Ethan. That's something to be proud of. Ethan smiled faintly, but he couldn't help wondering if it was enough. As he lay in bed that night, wrapped in his thin blanket, Ethan thought about Ms. Green's scarf and Mr. Patel's generosity. He thought about the old man he had helped and the way his mom always managed to find a way forward, no matter how tough things got. Maybe kindness was like a spark, he thought, a small act that could ignite something bigger. He didn't know it yet, but that spark was about to grow into something he never imagined. The following week brought a deepening chill to the air. Snow flurries dusted the streets, and the winds howled through the cracks in the apartment's old windows. Ethan bundled himself in Ms. Green's scarf and the hoodie his mom had given him, but the cold still gnawed at him. Karen's worries about rent were palpable, even if she tried to hide them. Ethan often caught her staring at the pile of bills on the table, her lips pressed into a thin line. He hated seeing her that way and felt a gnawing helplessness growing inside him. By Wednesday afternoon, Ethan had finished school and his shift at Mr. Patel's store. As he walked home, he passed the community center. He always ignored an old brick building tucked between a laundromat and a thrift shop. He paused when he noticed a small crowd gathered outside, bundled in coats and gloves, some carrying buckets of paint or boxes of supplies. Curiosity tugged at him, and he wandered closer. A woman with curly hair and a clipboard stood near the door, giving instructions to a group of volunteers. Ethan overheard her mention renovating the center and offering free meals to families in need. "Excuse me," Ethan said, hesitating as he approached her. The woman turned, her expression brightening. "Hello there. Can I help you?" "I'm Ethan," he said, feeling awkward. "I was just wondering, what's going on here?" She smiled warmly. "Hi, Ethan. I'm Mrs. Thompson, the coordinator here. We're fixing up the center to reopen it for the community. It's been closed for months, but we're hoping to make it a space where kids and families can come for support." Ethan nodded, intrigued. "Do you need more help?" Mrs. Thompson's face lit up. "We can always use an extra set of hands. Are you interested in volunteering?" "I think so," Ethan said. "What do you need me to do?" Mrs. Thompson handed him a paintbrush. "We're working on the main room today. Follow me." Inside, the community center was a mix of old charm and disrepair. The walls were scuffed and peeling, and the furniture was mismatched and worn. Still, there was an energy to the place, volunteers moving about, chatting and laughing as they worked. Ethan joined a group painting the walls. A tall guy in his early 20s introduced himself as Jake. "First time here?" Jake asked, rolling paint onto a large patch of wall. "Yeah," Ethan said. "It seemed like something worth helping with." Jake grinned. "It is. This place was a big deal when I was a kid. It's cool to see it coming back." As they worked, Ethan began to feel something he hadn't in a long time, a sense of belonging. The rhythm of painting, the chatter around him, and the shared purpose made the hours fly by. When they finished for the day, Mrs. Thompson handed Ethan a steaming bowl of chili from a large pot someone had brought in. "Thanks for helping, Ethan," she said. "It makes a big difference." Ethan accepted the bowl gratefully, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. It feels good to do something. That evening, Ethan told Karen about the community center as they ate the chili he had brought home for her. "That sounds like a great place," Karen said, her eyes softening. "I'm glad you found it." Ethan nodded, his chest swelling with a quiet pride. The next few days, Ethan spent every free moment at the center. He painted, cleaned, and helped rearrange furniture. He even carried in boxes of donated books and toys, stacking them neatly in the corner of what would become a kid's reading room. The other volunteers quickly grew fond of him. Jake often clapped him on the back, saying, "You've got a good work ethic, man." Mrs. Thompson praised his dedication, saying he was a natural at organizing the chaotic stream of donations that poured in. Ethan felt something shift within him. For the first time, he wasn't just a kid trying to make ends meet. He was part of something bigger, something meaningful. One cold evening, as they were finishing up for the day, Jake walked over with a pair of thick gloves. "Hey, Ethan," Jake said. "I noticed you've been working without gloves all week. Take these." Ethan looked at the gloves, stunned. "Are you sure? Don't you need them?" Jake laughed. "I've got another pair. Besides, you're the one out there hauling boxes in this freezing weather. You need them more." Ethan slipped the gloves on, marveling at their warmth. "Thanks, Jake. This means a lot." "No problem," Jake said, clapping him on the shoulder. "You're doing good work, Ethan. Keep it up." By Saturday, the community center was ready for its soft reopening. Ethan stood with the other volunteers, watching as families began to trickle in. Children laughed as they explored the reading corner, and parents lined up for warm meals and donated clothes. Mrs. Thompson approached Ethan, a smile of gratitude on her face. "I don't think we could have done this without you," she said. Ethan shook his head. "I didn't do much. Everyone pitched in." "You did more than you realize," she said gently. "You're a leader, Ethan. You inspire people." Her words stayed with him long after the event ended. As he walked home that evening, his hands snug in Jake's gloves and Ms. Green's scarf wrapped tightly around his neck, Ethan felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the layers he wore. The community center had given him more than just a place to help, it had given him hope. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, he thought about everything that had happened over the past few weeks. The kindness he had received, the way people came together to rebuild something for their community, it all felt like pieces of a larger puzzle coming together. For the first time in a long time, Ethan allowed himself to dream of better days ahead. And deep down, he knew this was just the beginning. The following Monday morning, Ethan awoke to the sound of his mom moving quietly in the kitchen. He lay in bed for a moment, the memory of the weekend's success at the community center filling him with a faint sense of pride. He had seen the kids smiling, the parents sharing gratitude with the volunteers, and even Mrs. Thompson beaming as she called the reopening a triumph. But the warm memory was quickly overshadowed as he heard Karen sigh heavily from the other room. Ethan pushed off his blanket, slipped into his borrowed hoodie, and walked to the kitchen. Karen was seated at the small table, her fingers tracing the edges of a stack of bills. Her eyes looked tired, the way they always did when the weight of their struggles felt especially heavy. "Morning, Mom," Ethan said softly, pulling out a chair across from her. She looked up, managing a faint smile. "Morning, sweetheart." Ethan glanced at the bills. "Are we okay?" Karen hesitated, then shook her head. "Rent's due Friday, and I'm short. I was hoping for more shifts this week, but my hours got cut again." Ethan clenched his hands into fists beneath the table. He hated feeling powerless. "I can talk to Mr. Patel," he said. "Maybe he'll let me pick up a few more shifts." Karen frowned. "You're already doing too much, Ethan. School, the community center, the store, you can't do everything." "But we need the money," he argued, his voice firm. "I can handle it, Mom." She sighed, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I know you want to help, but I don't want you running yourself ragged. We'll figure it out, okay?" Ethan nodded reluctantly, though the knot in his chest didn't loosen. At school, the weight of their financial struggles followed Ethan. His teachers' voices blurred as he sat in the back of the classroom, his mind racing with thoughts of overdue rent and his mom's tired eyes. During lunch, he sat alone near the edge of the cafeteria, picking at a peanut butter sandwich Karen had made for him. Across the room, he noticed Lisa, a classmate from his history class. She was talking animatedly with a group of friends, her laugh bright and carefree. Ethan ducked his head, focusing on his sandwich, but moments later, he heard a voice nearby. "Hey, Ethan." He looked up to see Lisa standing by his table, her tray balanced on one hand. "Hi," he said, surprised. "Mind if I sit?" she asked, already pulling out a chair. Sure." Lisa set her tray down and smiled. "You're Ethan, right? From history class?" "Yeah," he said, still unsure why she was talking to him. I heard about the community center reopening, Lisa said. My little cousin was there this weekend, and he hasn't stopped talking about it. You helped with that, right? Ethan shrugged. I just did a little painting and stuff. Lisa laughed softly. From what I heard, you did a lot more than that. That's really cool. Ethan felt his cheeks flush. He wasn't used to compliments, especially from someone like Lisa Bright, confident, and seemingly unbothered by the weight of the world. Thanks, he mumbled, unsure what else to say. Lisa nudged her tray closer, pulling a bag of chips from her lunch. It's awesome that you're helping the community. More people should do that. Ethan glanced at her, surprised by her sincerity. You should stop by sometime, he said. We're always looking for more volunteers. Lisa's face lit up. Really? I'd love to. Let me know when you need help. That evening, Ethan's walk home felt a little lighter. Lisa's encouragement had been unexpected, but uplifting. It was a reminder that even when things felt heavy, there were people who cared. But his brief reprieve was short-lived. As he turned onto his street, he saw a group of older boys hanging near the corner. He recognized one of them instantly. Josh, a classmate who never missed an opportunity to mock Ethan's worn clothes or quiet demeanor. Hey, Matthews, Josh called, smirking as Ethan passed. Still wearing hand-me-downs from the thrift store? Ethan kept his head down, ignoring him. Nice scarf, Josh added. Bet your mom knitted that for you because you can't afford a real one. The words stung, but Ethan bit his tongue and kept walking. He didn't have the energy to fight back. As he reached his apartment building, he heard laughter echo behind him. He clenched his fists, swallowing the lump in his throat. That night, as Ethan lay in bed, he replayed the events of the day. Lisa's kindness, Josh's cruelty, his mom's struggles, it all swirled in his mind. He felt pulled in 100 directions, unsure how to hold it all together. But then he thought of the community center, the laughter of the kids, the warmth of the volunteers, and the way Mrs. Thompson had told him he was making a difference. Maybe he couldn't solve everything, but he could keep trying. The next morning, Ethan walked to school with his head held a little higher. He was still cold, and the worry about rent hadn't disappeared, but there was a flicker of determination in his chest. When he arrived, Lisa waved to him from across the hallway. Hey, Ethan, she called, walking over. I was serious about helping at the community center. Let me know when I can stop by. Ethan smiled. We're working on a clothing drive this weekend. You should come. Lisa grinned. Count me in. At lunch, Ethan found himself sitting with Lisa again, her cheerful energy lifting his spirits. Even Mike, a guy from their math class, joined them, joking about how Ethan was saving the world one paintbrush at a time. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt seen not for his struggles, but for his efforts. And though he didn't know it yet, the kindness of people like Lisa and Mike would soon ripple through his life in ways he could never imagine. The days leading up to the weekend passed quickly. Ethan spent his afternoons at the community center, helping organize the upcoming clothing drive. Mrs. Thompson worked tirelessly alongside him, her enthusiasm contagious. Volunteers sorted donations in the back room, filling racks and tables with warm coats, gloves, scarves, and sweaters. Ethan's chest swelled with pride every time a new bag of donations came through the door. On Saturday morning, the center buzzed with activity. Families lined up early, eager to browse the clothing and pick out what they needed. Ethan moved between tables, helping parents find sizes for their children and directing kids to the reading corner when they grew restless. Lisa arrived midway through the event, her arms full of neatly folded clothes. "Hey, Ethan," she called as she set the pile down on a table. "Brought these from home. My mom and I went through our closets last night." "That's awesome," Ethan said, giving her a genuine smile. "Thanks for helping out." Lisa grinned. "I told you, I'm all in. This place is great." As the event wound down, Ethan felt a rare sense of accomplishment. He watched as families left with bags of warm clothes, their gratitude shining through tired eyes. He stayed late to help clean up, and by the time he headed home, it was nearly dark. The cold wind stung his cheeks as Ethan turned onto his street. His legs ached from standing all day, but his spirits were high. He had seen firsthand how much the community center was helping people, and it made all the hard work worth it. As he approached his apartment building, he noticed something unusual. The faint outline of a figure sat slumped in the corner of the stairwell, partially hidden by shadows. Ethan stopped, his breath visible in the freezing air. For a moment, he debated turning away. He was tired, and it had been a long day. But the memory of the old man outside the convenience store flashed through his mind. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped closer. "Hello?" he called softly. The figure shifted, revealing an older man, wrapped in a threadbare blanket. His face was lined with exhaustion, his hands trembling as they clutched the edges of the fabric. Ethan's heart sank. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked, crouching down. The man looked up, his eyes tired but kind. "Just needed a place to rest," he murmured. His voice was hoarse, barely audible over the wind. Ethan hesitated, glancing back at the warm glow of his apartment window. He thought of his mom, of how worried she would be if she saw this man on their doorstep. "Wait here," Ethan said, standing abruptly. He ran upstairs, the cold biting at his fingers as he unlocked the door. Karen looked up from the couch, startled. "You're late," she said, then frowned. "What's wrong?" "There's someone outside," Ethan said quickly. "An older man. He looks like he's been out there a while." Karen's brow furrowed. "Out in this cold? He'll freeze." "I was thinking—" Ethan hesitated. "Maybe we could let him come in, just for a little while, until he warms up." Karen stared at him, her worry warring with hesitation. Finally, she sighed and grabbed a blanket from the couch. "All right," she said, "but just for a little while." Ethan returned to the stairwell, relieved to see the man was still there. "Come on," Ethan said gently, offering his hand. "You can warm up inside." The man hesitated, his gaze searching Ethan's face. Then he nodded, allowing Ethan to help him to his feet. Inside, Karen had set out a bowl of soup and a cup of tea at their small kitchen table. The man sat carefully, his hands shaking as he picked up the spoon. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to trouble anyone." "It's no trouble," Karen said, though her tone was wary. The man ate slowly, his movements deliberate, as if he hadn't had a proper meal in days. "What's your name?" Ethan asked after a moment. "Ben," the man said, setting down his spoon. "Ben Walker." Karen's expression softened. "Well, Ben, you're welcome to stay until you warm up." As the evening went on, Ben opened up, sharing bits and pieces of his story. He had lost his home years ago after a string of bad luck, an illness that drained his savings, a job that let him go, and no family to fall back on. "I've been trying to get back on my feet," Ben said, his voice heavy with regret. "But it's hard when you've got nothing to start with." Ethan listened quietly, his heart aching for the man. He thought about how easily his own life could spiral into the same kind of hardship. "You'll get there," Ethan said softly. "The community center helps people like you. You should stop by. They've got food, clothes, and people who care." Ben smiled faintly. "Maybe I will." After a few hours, Ben stood, wrapping the borrowed blanket around his shoulders. "I should go," he said, his voice firm despite the slight tremor. "Thank you for everything. You didn't have to do this." Karen handed him a plastic bag with a few pieces of bread and a spare pair of socks Ethan had found. "Take care of yourself, Ben." Ethan walked him to the door, watching as he disappeared into the cold night. That night, Ethan lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake the image of Ben's tired face or the quiet gratitude in his voice. Maybe the center can help him, Ethan thought. Maybe I can help him. As he drifted off to sleep, a new determination settled in his chest. He had seen what kindness could do, and now he was starting to understand how far it could go. The next morning, Ethan woke early, the cold light of dawn filtering through his curtains. He dressed quickly, grabbing the gloves Jake had given him and wrapping Ms. Green's scarf snugly around his neck. As he walked to the community center, his mind raced with ideas. Ben needs more than a bowl of soup, he thought. What if we did something bigger? The clothing drive had been a success, but maybe it was just the beginning. Ethan was starting to see the ripples of kindness around him, and he knew there was more he could do. By the time he reached the center, Mrs. Thompson was already inside, organizing supplies. She looked up and smiled as Ethan walked in. "Morning, Ethan," she said. "You're here early." Ethan smiled back, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Mrs. Thompson, I've got an idea." Ethan stood by Mrs. Thompson's desk, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The community center bustled around them as volunteers prepared for the day's activities. Kids' laughter echoed from the playroom, and the clatter of dishes came from the small kitchen. Ethan's voice was steady but filled with urgency. "I was thinking," he began, "what if we did more than just give out clothes or meals? There are people out there like this guy I met, Ben, who need more than a quick fix. They need a way to get back on their feet. Could we start something for that?" Mrs. Thompson raised her eyebrows, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" "Well," Ethan hesitated, but the idea that had been forming in his mind since last night spilled out. "What if we organized a program, like a drive, but focused on helping people get what they need to move forward: warm clothes, job resources, maybe even a place to sleep for a while?" Mrs. Thompson leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her clipboard. "That's a big undertaking, Ethan, but I like the idea. It's ambitious." Ethan straightened. "I'll do whatever it takes to help. I just feel like we could do more." Mrs. Thompson smiled, a warm, encouraging look in her eyes. "You've got a good heart, Ethan. All right, let's start small. We can host a winter care drive and invite people to donate coats, blankets, and job-related items like shoes or business clothes. We'll focus on building connections to other resources places that can offer housing or employment opportunities. Sound good?" Ethan's chest swelled with hope. "Yeah, that sounds amazing. I'll get the word out." Ethan spent the next few days recruiting help. At school, he passed out flyers he'd made with Lisa's help. She had an eye for design, and her cheerful energy made it easy to get others involved. "You've got to come to the care drive," Lisa said to anyone who would listen. "It's going to make a real difference for people in need." Mike, who had become a regular at the community center since Ethan mentioned it, helped spread the word. Even Josh, the same boy who had mocked Ethan days earlier, approached him in the hallway. "I saw one of your flyers," Josh said, awkwardly rubbing the back of his neck. "My mom's got some coats we were going to donate. I'll bring them by the center this weekend." Ethan blinked in surprise, but quickly nodded. "Thanks. That would help a lot." Josh shrugged, his tone softening. "It's cool's what you're doing, man. Keep it up." By Saturday morning, the community center was buzzing with activity. Donations poured in boxes of winter gear, shoes, and even unopened packages of socks and gloves. Volunteers worked tirelessly, sorting items and arranging them on tables. Ethan moved between groups, helping wherever he could. Every time he saw a new box of donations or a family leaving with bags full of warm clothing, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Mrs. Thompson approached him mid-morning, a clipboard in hand. "Ethan, I want you to meet someone," she said, gesturing to an older man standing near the donation tables. Ethan recognized him instantly. "Ben!" he said, his face lighting up. Ben smiled, looking cleaner and better rested than the last time Ethan had seen him. He wore the scarf Ethan had given him on their first meeting. "I stopped by like you said," Ben said. "And, well, I wanted to help. If you'll let me." Mrs. Thompson beamed. "Ben's been sharing some great ideas for how we can reach more people. I think he's going to be a wonderful addition to our team." Ethan couldn't stop the smile spreading across his face. "That's awesome. I'm glad you came, Ben." Ben nodded, his expression sincere. "You gave me more than a scarf, kid. You gave me hope. Now, I want to pay it forward." The care drive was a massive success. By the end of the day, families in need had received more than just warm clothes. Mrs. Thompson had worked with local organizations to connect several attendees with temporary housing, job training, and even counseling services. Ethan stood by the door as the last family left, their arms full of donated items. He felt a deep satisfaction in his chest. Lisa walked over, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That was incredible, Ethan. Look at everything we accomplished." "We did it together," Ethan said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Still," Lisa said, nudging his arm, "you're the reason it all started. You should be proud of yourself." Ethan's face flushed, but he smiled. For once, he allowed himself to feel the pride she spoke of. That evening, as Ethan walked home, the sky was dark, but the city seemed brighter. The scarf around his neck and gloves on his hands were tangible reminders of the kindness he'd received and the kindness he was now able to share. When he stepped into the apartment, Karen was waiting for him at the kitchen table. Her face looked tired, but there was a softness in her eyes that hadn't been there in weeks. "How'd it go?" she asked. Ethan sat down, setting his bag on the floor. "It was amazing. So many people showed up, Mom, and we actually helped them." Karen smiled, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm so proud of you, Ethan. You found something special." Ethan looked down at their hands, his throat tightening. "I just want to make things better for everyone." Karen nodded, her voice steady. "And you are." That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. The care drive had been just the beginning, he realized. There was so much more they could do, so many more lives to touch. And for the first time, the thought didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like a challenge he was ready to face. Ethan closed his eyes, a small smile tugging at his lips. The spark had turned into a flame, and he couldn't wait to see how far it would spread. The Monday after the care drive, Ethan walked into school feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The success of the event still filled him with a quiet pride. He had seen families leave the community center with more than just warm clothes. They had left with hope. It was a feeling that stayed with him as he went about his day. During lunch, Ethan sat with Lisa and Mike at their usual table. Lisa was scrolling through her phone when she suddenly gasped. "Ethan, look at this," she said, turning her phone toward him. The screen displayed an article from the local news website. The headline read, "Teen-led initiative sparks hope at community center." Beneath it was a picture of Ethan standing next to Ben and Mrs. Thompson, smiling in front of tables piled with donations. "What the?" Ethan started, his stomach flipping. "How did this happen?" Lisa grinned. "Mrs. Thompson must have reached out to the press. This is so cool. Everyone's going to know about the great work you're doing." Mike clapped Ethan on the back, nearly knocking him off his chair. "You're famous now, man. Local hero in the making." Ethan's face burned. "I'm not a hero," he muttered. "It wasn't just me. Everyone helped." "But you started it," Lisa said firmly. "Don't downplay that, Ethan. You made a difference." The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch, but the conversation lingered in Ethan's mind. By the time Ethan got home, the news had reached Karen. She held up a printout of the article, her face beaming with pride. "Ethan, look at this," she said, waving the paper. "I can't believe it. They're calling you a leader." Ethan took the paper, his cheeks flushing as he read the words. He couldn't deny the surge of pride in his chest, but it also felt overwhelming. "It's just an article," he said, setting it down. Karen placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's more than that, sweetheart. This shows people what's possible. You should be proud of yourself." Ethan nodded, but his thoughts swirled. Could he live up to the expectations people were starting to have for him? The next day at the community center, Ethan arrived to find Mrs. Thompson grinning. "We've had so many calls this morning," she said. "People read the article and want to help. We've got new volunteers signing up, businesses offering donations. It's incredible." Ethan blinked, stunned. "Really?" "Really," she said. "And it's because of you, Ethan. Your story inspired people." Before Ethan could respond, Ben walked in, carrying a box of donated shoes. "Morning, kid," Ben said, setting the box down. "Saw your picture in the paper. Not bad for a rookie." Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "I think you deserve some of the credit, Ben. You're the reason I came up with the care drive in the first place." Ben's expression softened. "You gave me a reason to keep going, Ethan. Don't sell yourself short." Over the next few weeks, the article brought a wave of support to the community center. Ethan was overwhelmed by the generosity of people who donated money, supplies, and even their time. The center expanded its programs, offering workshops for job skills, tutoring for kids, and regular hot meals for families. Ethan threw himself into the work, organizing events and helping wherever he was needed. But as the weeks went on, the pressure began to build. People expected him to have all the answers, to be the driving force behind every initiative. One afternoon, as Ethan was sorting a shipment of donated books, Lisa walked in. She took one look at him and frowned. "You look exhausted," she said. "When was the last time you took a break?" Ethan shrugged, stacking the books on a shelf. "There's too much to do. I can't stop now." Lisa grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "Ethan, you're not in this alone. You've got Mrs. Thompson, Ben, and a ton of volunteers. Let them help." Ethan sighed, the weight of her words sinking in. I don't want to let anyone down." Lisa's expression softened. "You won't, but you can't do everything by yourself. Trust me, people believe in you, and they'll step up if you let them." That evening, Ethan took Lisa's advice. He talked to Mrs. Thompson about delegating more tasks to the other volunteers. She agreed wholeheartedly, assuring him that the center wouldn't fall apart if he stepped back occasionally. It was a relief, though it took time for Ethan to adjust. A few days later, Ethan was asked to speak at a school assembly about his work at the community center. Standing on the auditorium stage, he felt his palms sweat as hundreds of students stared up at him. He cleared his throat, gripping the microphone tightly. "I'm not going to lie," he began, his voice shaky. "When I first started volunteering, I didn't think I'd be up here talking about it. I just wanted to help one person, and I thought that would be enough. But what I've learned is that kindness has a way of growing, of inspiring people to do more." He paused, his nerves settling as he saw Lisa and Mike smiling at him from the front row. "The truth is, I couldn't have done any of this alone. It's about all of us working together, believing in each other, and showing up when it matters. That's how we make a difference." The room erupted in applause, and Ethan felt a strange mix of relief and pride. After the assembly, a few students approached him, asking how they could get involved. Ethan's heart swelled as he realized the ripple effect was continuing to grow. When he got home that evening, Karen hugged him tightly. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. Ethan hugged her back, the warmth of her words settling deep in his chest. That night, as Ethan sat at his desk, he pulled out a notebook and began jotting down ideas for the next community event. The pressure wasn't gone, but it felt lighter now. He knew he didn't have to do it all alone. And with every step forward, he was reminded of the simple truth that had started it all. Kindness changes everything. The recognition from the assembly brought a new wave of energy to Ethan's work at the community center. More students volunteered after school, parents offered resources, and local businesses pitched in with donations. The center felt alive with activity, its programs growing beyond what Ethan had imagined just a month ago. One cold Thursday evening, Ethan was stacking chairs in the corner of the reading room after a tutoring session. The soft hum of conversation drifted in from the kitchen, where Mrs. Thompson and Ben were wrapping up plans for the next food drive. "Ethan, come here for a second," Mrs. Thompson called. Ethan wiped his hands on his jeans and walked into the kitchen, where Ben was leaning against the counter, holding an envelope. "What's up?" Ethan asked. Ben smiled, handing the envelope to Ethan. "This is for you and your mom." Ethan blinked, confused. He glanced at Mrs. Thompson, who nodded encouragingly. Slowly, he opened the envelope. Inside was a neat stack of cash, more than Ethan had seen in one place in a long time. His throat tightened. "Ben, I can't take this. You've already been through so much." Ben raised a hand to stop him. "Ethan, listen. When I was at my lowest, you and your mom gave me a second chance. You didn't have much, but you shared what you had. This is my way of saying thank you." Ethan's hands trembled as he held the envelope. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll use it," Ben said gently. "I've been working odd jobs and things are starting to turn around for me. I want to pay it forward." Mrs. Thompson placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Ben insisted on this, Ethan. It's his way of giving back, just like you taught us all to do." Ethan swallowed hard, emotions swirling in his chest. "Thank you," he whispered. When Ethan got home, Karen was folding laundry at the kitchen table. She looked up as he walked in, her brow furrowing when she saw the envelope in his hand. "What's that?" she asked. Ethan sat down across from her, setting the envelope on the table. "It's from Ben. He wanted to give it to us, to say thank you." Karen opened the envelope, her eyes widening as she saw the cash. Her hands flew to her mouth. "Ethan, this is so much." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "He said he's getting back on his feet, and this is his way of giving back." Karen shook her head, her eyes glistening with tears. "I don't know how we're so lucky to have someone like you, Ethan. You've inspired so much kindness. Look at what it's brought us." Ethan felt his face flush. "It's not just me, Mom. Everyone's been a part of this." Karen reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "You're the spark, sweetheart. Never forget that." The next morning, Ethan woke to the smell of pancakes. He walked into the kitchen to find Karen humming softly as she flipped the last pancake onto a plate. "Morning," she said, smiling. "I figured we could celebrate a little." Ethan laughed, sitting down at the table. "Thanks, Mom. This is awesome." As they ate, Karen brought up something that had been on her mind. "Ethan, have you thought about what you want to do after high school?" Ethan paused mid-bite. He had thought about it, but with everything happening, his future plans had taken a back seat. "Not really," he admitted. "Well, you've been doing amazing work at the center," Karen said. "Have you thought about studying something related to that? Maybe social work or community development?" Ethan shrugged. "Maybe. I don't know how we'd pay for college." Karen gave him a knowing smile. "One thing at a time, sweetheart. You've already got people noticing you. Who knows what opportunities might come your way?" That afternoon, Ethan returned to the community center with a renewed sense of focus. As he helped set up for the day's mentoring program, Mrs. Thompson pulled him aside. "Ethan, I've got some exciting news," she said, her eyes sparkling. "What is it?" he asked, curious. "A local business has offered us a grant," she said. "They heard about the work we've been doing, and they want to help us expand our programs. We'll be able to offer more meals, more classes, and maybe even some scholarships for kids who volunteer." Ethan's jaw dropped. "That's incredible. How did they hear about us?" Mrs. Thompson smiled. "Your story has inspired a lot of people, Ethan. You're the reason this is happening." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Mrs. Thompson said. "Just keep being you." As the days passed, the grant money transformed the community center. New supplies arrived, volunteers increased, and programs expanded. The once quiet building was now a bustling hub of activity. One evening, as Ethan was leaving the center, Ben caught up with him. "Hey, kid," Ben said, his tone warm. "I wanted to tell you something." "What's up?" Ethan asked. "I've been talking to Mrs. Thompson about starting a new program," Ben said. "Something to help people like me, those who've hit rock bottom and need a hand to get back up. I want to create a space where they can find support, resources, and hope." Ethan's heart swelled. "That's an amazing idea, Ben. I think it'll help a lot of people." Ben nodded, his expression serious. "It's all because of you, Ethan. You showed me what kindness can do. Now I want to pass it on." That night, Ethan sat at his desk, staring at a blank piece of paper. He thought about everything that had happened: the care drive, the grant, Ben's transformation, and how much his life had changed since that cold day outside the convenience store. He picked up his pen and began writing. He didn't know exactly where this journey would take him, but for the first time, he felt ready to dream about the future. Because if one small act of kindness could create all this, the possibilities were endless. The following weeks brought a sense of momentum to Ethan's life that he hadn't felt before. The community center had blossomed into a cornerstone of the neighborhood, buzzing with activity every day. From the new meal program to the mentorship initiative, every space in the center was being put to good use. Ethan found himself balancing school, volunteer work, and newfound responsibilities, his days stretching longer but feeling fuller. One chilly morning, as he helped Ben organize materials for the new recovery program, Mrs. Thompson approached them with a thoughtful expression. "Ethan, Ben, I've been thinking," she began, crossing her arms. "We've done so much for the people who come to the center, but there's still a gap. What about outreach? There are folks who don't know we're here or feel like they don't belong. What if we went to them instead?" Ben nodded slowly. "You mean hitting the streets, talking to people where they are?" "Exactly," Mrs. Thompson said, her eyes lighting up. "We could bring essentials, blankets, food, warm clothes, and let them know about the resources here." Ethan perked up, the idea sparking something in him. "That's a great idea. I could help organize it. We could start with the people we know, like the ones who came to the care drive, and expand from there." Mrs. Thompson smiled warmly. "I knew you'd say that, Ethan. Let's make it happen." Over the next few days, Ethan worked tirelessly to prepare for the first outreach event. Volunteers packed bags with sandwiches, bottled water, and donated blankets. Lisa and Mike helped design flyers that listed the community center's programs and contact information. "Do you think this will work?" Lisa asked one evening, as they folded the flyers into neat stacks. Ethan nodded, though his expression was serious. "Even if it only helps a few people, it's worth it. There are so many out there who just need someone to care." The day of the outreach, the volunteers split into small groups, each assigned a section of the neighborhood. Ethan, Ben, and Lisa worked together, their arms full of bags as they walked down Main Street. The cold wind bit at their faces, but the warmth of their mission kept their spirits high. They approached anyone who looked in need: a man sitting on a bench, a woman huddled under a bus stop shelter, a teenager leaning against a building with her hood pulled up. "Hi," Ethan said gently to the woman at the bus stop, holding out a bag. "We're from the community center down the street. This is for you. There's some food and a blanket inside. If you ever need more help, we've got programs that might be useful." The woman looked up, her eyes weary but grateful. "Thank you," she said softly, clutching the bag to her chest. "I didn't know there was a place like that around here." "There is," Ethan said with a small smile, "and you're always welcome." By the afternoon, Ethan's group had handed out nearly all their supplies. As they turned onto a quiet side street, Ethan stopped short. Sitting against a brick wall, bundled in layers of mismatched clothing, was someone he recognized immediately. "Ben." "Look," Ethan whispered, nodding toward the man. Ben followed his gaze and froze. "No way. That's Gary." "Who's Gary?" Lisa asked. "A friend," Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. We were close before everything fell apart. I thought I'd never see him again." Ben stepped forward, his hands trembling. "Gary?" The man looked up, his face lined with exhaustion but familiar. His eyes widened. "Ben? Is that you?" "It's me," Ben said, crouching beside him. "What happened, man? How'd you end up here?" Gary shook his head, his voice cracking. "Lost my job, my place, everything. Been trying to get back on my feet, but it's been rough." Ethan crouched beside them, pulling a blanket and a bottle of water from his bag. "Hi, Gary. I'm Ethan. We're with the community center. You don't have to do this alone anymore. We can help." Gary looked between Ben and Ethan, his eyes filling with tears. "I don't know what to say." "Just come with us," Ben said firmly. "We'll get you a hot meal and figure out the rest from there." That evening, Gary sat in the warmth of the community center, a steaming bowl of soup in his hands. Volunteers brought him fresh clothes and directed him to a cot in the corner for when he was ready to rest. Ethan watched from across the room, his heart swelling. This was why they did this work, to remind people like Gary that they weren't forgotten. Ben approached him, his expression a mix of gratitude and determination. "Ethan, I owe you for this. If it weren't for you, I wouldn't be here to help Gary or anyone else." Ethan shook his head. "You don't owe me anything, Ben. You've done just as much as I have." "No," Ben said firmly. "You started this. And now, we're building something incredible together." The outreach program became a regular initiative, drawing more volunteers and more attention to the community center's mission. Local organizations began partnering with them, offering additional resources and expanding their reach. Ethan found himself busier than ever, but he no longer felt overwhelmed. He had learned to trust the team around him, to share the weight of their shared purpose. One evening, as Ethan was finishing a report for Mrs. Thompson, Lisa walked in with a plate of cookies from the kitchen. "You've been at this all day," she said, setting the plate down beside him. "Take a break." Ethan laughed, leaning back in his chair. "You sound like my mom." "She's a smart woman," Lisa quipped, sitting across from him. For a moment, they sat in comfortable silence, the soft hum of activity in the background. "Ethan," Lisa said, her tone serious, "do you ever think about how far this could go? Like, where it could lead?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Sometimes. It's hard to believe how much has already happened. But yeah, I think we can do even more." Lisa smiled. "I think so too, and I know you'll make it happen." Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, her words settling deeply. "Thanks, Lisa. I couldn't do any of this without you or everyone else." Lisa shrugged, her smile widening. "That's what makes it special, right? We're all in this together." Ethan nodded, his heart full. The ripple of kindness that had started with a single act had grown into something bigger than he ever imagined. And for the first time, he felt ready to dream even bigger. Because together, they could build bridges to brighter futures, not just for their community, but for anyone willing to believe in the power of hope. The crisp morning air nipped at Ethan's face as he walked to the community center, the familiar scarf snug around his neck. The streets were quieter than usual, but Ethan's thoughts were anything but. Today was the culmination of months of hard work, a special event to celebrate the community center's growth and recognize all those who had helped along the way. When Ethan arrived, the center was already alive with activity. Volunteers moved briskly, setting up tables, arranging chairs, and hanging banners that read, "Together, we thrive." The scent of freshly baked goods and simmering soup wafted through the air. Mrs. Thompson greeted Ethan with a warm smile as he entered. "There you are. I was starting to think you might take the day off for once." Ethan laughed. "Not a chance. What do you need me to do?" "Start with the donation table," she said. "We're expecting a lot of drop-offs today." Ethan nodded, heading to the table near the entrance, where Lisa and Mike were already sorting through boxes of clothes and canned goods. "Late as always," Mike teased, tossing Ethan a pair of gloves. I'll remember that the next time you need help, Ethan shot back with a grin. Lisa rolled her eyes but smiled. Glad you're here, Ethan. This is going to be great. As the event began, families and neighbors streamed in, filling the community center with warmth and laughter. There were activities for the kids, resource stations for adults, and tables laden with food for everyone to share. Ethan worked tirelessly, directing newcomers and ensuring everything ran smoothly. Each time he paused to take in the scene, the smiling faces, the lively conversations, the unmistakable energy of hope, it reminded him why he had started all of this. Toward the afternoon, Mrs. Thompson tapped a microphone at the front of the room, calling for everyone's attention. Thank you all for coming today, she began, her voice carrying across the crowded space. This event is about celebrating our community and the incredible things we've accomplished together. None of this would be possible without each of you, and especially without someone who's inspired us all. She turned to Ethan, her smile radiant. Ethan Matthews, could you join me up here? Ethan froze, his heart pounding. The room erupted in applause as Lisa nudged him forward. Go on, she whispered, grinning. Reluctantly, Ethan made his way to the front, his cheeks flushing. Ethan, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice warm, your kindness, determination, and leadership have transformed this community center into something extraordinary. You've reminded all of us what it means to care for one another. And today, we want to recognize you for everything you've done. She held out a plaque that read, Ethan Matthews, for your dedication and impact on our community. Ethan stared at the plaque, his throat tightening. The applause grew louder as Mrs. Thompson handed it to him. I don't know what to say, Ethan managed, his voice shaking. Say what's in your heart, Mrs. Thompson said gently. Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze sweeping the room. Thank you, he began. This means more to me than I can say. But this isn't just about me. It's about all of us, everyone who's volunteered, donated, or just showed up. This place is special because of you. When I first started coming here, I just wanted to help one person. I never imagined it would lead to this. But what I've learned is that kindness has a ripple effect. One small act can grow into something so much bigger, and that's what's happened here. So, thank you for believing in this place, and for believing in each other. Together, we're building something that will last, something that will keep making a difference. The room burst into applause again, and Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. He stepped back into the crowd, where Lisa and Mike greeted him with hugs and cheers. You killed it, Lisa said, her grin wide. Ethan laughed, brushing at his eyes. I couldn't have done any of this without you. As the event wound down, Ethan found a quiet moment outside, leaning against the railing of the front steps. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood. Ben joined him, his hands tucked into his coat pockets. Big day, Ben said, a smile playing on his lips. Yeah, Ethan replied, gazing out at the street. It still feels surreal sometimes. Ben nodded. You know, when I first met you, I didn't think much about the future. But now, you've shown me that it's never too late to start again. And because of that, I'm not just surviving anymore, I'm living. Ethan looked at him, his chest tightening. You've taught me just as much, Ben. None of this would have happened without you. Ben chuckled. We'll call it even, kid. That night, as Ethan walked home, the weight of the plaque in his backpack felt reassuring. When he stepped into the apartment, Karen was waiting for him, her face lighting up when she saw him. How was it? She asked, already knowing the answer. It was amazing, Ethan said, pulling the plaque from his bag and setting it on the table. Karen's eyes filled with tears as she read it. You've made me so proud, Ethan. Ethan hugged her tightly. Thanks, Mom, for everything. Later, as Ethan lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From giving away his jacket on a freezing day to leading a thriving community center. It had been a path filled with challenges, lessons, and growth. But most of all, it had been a journey of kindness, the kind he had received, and the kind he had passed on. Ethan smiled to himself, a deep sense of peace settling over him. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Because kindness doesn't just change one life, it changes many. And in doing so, it lights the way to a brighter tomorrow. Later, as Ethan lay in bed, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, he thought about the journey that had brought him here. From giving away his jacket on a freezing day to leading a thriving community center, it had been a path filled with challenges, lessons, and growth. But most of all, it had been a journey of kindness, the kind he had received and the kind he had passed on. Ethan smiled to himself, a deep sense of peace settling over him. This wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Because kindness doesn't just change one life, it changes many. And in doing so, it lights the way to a brighter tomorrow. Thank you for joining me on Ethan's journey. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, please subscribe for updates and future stories. Your support helps share messages of hope, kindness, and resilience with the world. Let's spread positivity together.